Hi, I'm Martyn Sibley, a community leader at Open Inclusion. Welcome to our podcast series, Inclusive Design, Broader Perspectives for Better Experiences, also available as a captioned podcast on Open Inclusion's YouTube channel. Open Inclusion is a research, user insight, design and innovation consultancy based in London, England. We help organizations create beautifully inclusive and effective experiences. If you would like to know more about the work we do or would like to contact us, please visit openinclusion.com. We would love to hear from you. In this podcast series, we're interviewing a wide range of people who help us better understand inclusion, both from a user and service provider perspective. So hopefully, guys, you saw the first of the double bill we have on the topic of access and inclusion to physical spaces and physical products. You may remember, if you did watch it, that we had Stephen and Ed talking about the bigger picture and the barriers and some of the solutions that they have worked on. And obviously, if you haven't seen that episode, please do go back to the previous one to catch up on that. So following on from their amazing input and insights, I'm starting off today by interviewing Tom Pokinko, who is the research director at Open. And we work very closely because I'm one of the six leads of the panel leads. My area is mobility and dexterity, but there's 5 other people covering 5 other segments of disability. And we all really support Tom in the amazing work he does in supporting clients on how to create universal and inclusive design. So it's a really nice time to have a bit of a chat with Tom, so you could actually hear the work that he and Open are doing and hear of some of the case studies that bring to life this very important topic. And finally, we're going to hear from Chris McGinley, who works at the Helen Hamlin Foundation, doing all sorts of creative and amazing design and using research as a really big way of creating inclusive and universal design as well. So what the big example that Chris gave that I really enjoyed hearing about was how they were looking at the adapted taxis in London, the Hackney carriages as they used to be known, and the way they mocked up the real size of the taxis using kind of wood and other ways of creating the model, and then were able to engage disabled people to look at the difficulties of getting in and out of the taxis and coming up with new innovative design ideas. So a little bit of a sneak peek into what Chris will be talking about later. So yeah, settle down, and I hope you're going to enjoy these 2 amazing interviews as we finish off our double bill on physical spaces and physical products. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, Tom. It's great to do a live podcast interview in person. So it'd be great, just first of all, if you just give a little bit more about your role at Open Inclusion.
Absolutely. So I'm a research director at Open Inclusion. So I basically supervise and run research with our panel members, who are people from all walks of life, all over the UK, over 400 in total. And they all are united in the fact that they have some disability or access needs, often multiple. And so we work closely with our panel to provide valuable insight for companies and organizations in the third sector, in the private sector, in government. And yeah, so I run that research, and I also oversee Open's research strategy going forward.
Brilliant. So obviously we've heard from a few other guests in this podcast series on physical spaces and products.
Yeah.
So first of all, I just wanted to hear from your opinion, but also Open's as well, why is it important for people to have access to physical spaces?
Yeah, so I think in terms of where we're at now as a society with digital gadgets being so prevalent, and we were all holding these little supercomputers in our pockets via the phones and so on. I still think physical accessibility is massively important as well. I've personally witnessed over the course of working at Open for 3 years, people pass by storefronts on the high street because they think they're inaccessible, and they are inaccessible, in fact. So that business is lost, and also the impact that has on the potential customer, because they feel, unable to go and do what they want to do ultimately. And then the same can be said of, trains and planes and transport, cars, you name it. Any industry is still obviously so impacted by physical accessibility, and needs to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the panel leads that we will meeting up with later today, there's different experiences from different impairments, but in the end it's about wanting to go about your everyday life.
Absolutely, but even let's say someone who's on the autism spectrum, is very sensitive to crowds and noise, and would like to visit family members, and goes through some busy train stations, or let alone the London Underground. Some stations can be very busy, as you know. There's whatever the access need, or if you're hearing impaired and you can't hear announcements at such stations. All these are physical factors that impact one's experience of ultimately doing what they're trying to do. And the other thing that I'm passionate about is physical products. My original training way back when it was in industrial design. This was in the late 90s, so I was designing stuff like CD players, portable CD players, and salt and pepper shakers and things like that. But the products we use every single day, I mean, we still use physical products all the time, and they impact our quality of life and ultimately what we can and can't do.
Well, two of the things I love about open inclusion is the solution-oriented approach and bringing through the voice of disabled people. And I know you're working on many projects with many different clients, but it'd be great just to get a couple of insights into some of the projects you've been working on in this area.
Yeah, so we've worked across various industries with a lot of different companies and organizations. So yes, there's been quite a lot we've been up to. I mean, just to pick three case studies, I suppose. The first is a high street retailer who thought they had an accessible solution, essentially a step-free access for their flagship store, which was in a grade 2 listed building. And they had a sort of solution, but they strongly suspected that they needed a better solution. So what we did is we brought our panel members in, and we did a kind of mystery shopping where we hung back and got their insights about using this existing solution. It was found to be just not sufficient. For the numbers of people going through the store, it was an excellent solution in other contexts, but not in that context. So then what we did is we brainstormed with them about what they could be doing, what this store could do to improve access. And then ultimately we took all those findings that were captured on video of people struggling with the solution, people suggesting alternatives, and we presented it to City Council, along with a handful of examples of elegant ramp solutions that worked in a listed building context. And so we helped to persuade, the council for years had actually resisted the idea of a ramp. And I'm proud to say that, thanks in part to our research ultimately being shown in that context of the meeting, we got that ramp approved about a year later, and now it's a beautiful, elegant, totally in keeping with the grade 2 listed building. And in fact, a little follow-up on this is when we went there the year after, and we took a look. The first thing we saw was a lady with a pushchair going up the ramp.
That's great. So that's true inclusion.
That's
right?
True inclusion, and that's what we're after. So that was one example. The other one, really quickly, is wayfinding. So we're helping to provide insight from a disability perspective on wayfinding in a busy central London campus. And as you can imagine, university campuses kind of tend to grow over time, and they become these, buildings get added on and things get, and so the wayfinding challenges are real. And what we were working with people with mobility impairments, but also people with cognitive, neurodiversity, learn differently, people who are on the spectrum, and we found some very, very useful insight about what they would like to see in wayfinding. And then the third thing that we've been involved with is a hybrid approach, and this is really interesting because it's about making train stations more accessible for neurodiverse travelers. So we, the project is specifically focusing on neurodiverse needs, because oftentimes those are less represented, I suppose, in the dialogue. So it's not to say we don't, obviously we care about universal access for everybody, but in this particular project, we are using the lens of neurodiversity. And many of our panel members who are neurodiverse also have mobility impairment, they have sight issues, they have vision, they have hearing impairments as well. So we have that comorbidity anyway happening. But yes, we're finding some very interesting insights and feedback there on things like the impact of crowds in a busy train station, the impact of announcements not being heard, just the general stress levels of going to an unknown place. And so we are devising solutions that actually leverage digital technology. So imagine this, you can pick up an app or a website on the website, and you can see photos of the station interior. That helps alleviate anxiety massively. You can see when the quiet times are. You can even gauge, this is early stage study, so we don't have this technology developed yet, but ideas that are coming out of this research are like real-time updates on crowd levels in the station, So by using digital technology in a physical environment, we can improve physical accessibility, because then people who are going through those stations can seek out a quieter route or a quieter time.
Well, another thing I love about working with you guys is this visionary approach and the passion of how the world can be in the future. I mean, you've touched a little bit there on some of the things that are starting to come through. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to finish on that excites you about the future?
One one area that we're very excited about, that I'm personally excited about, is autonomous vehicles and vehicle design. Even something like the switch to hybrid vehicles and electric, if and when, really it's a matter of when the combustion engine is replaced by the electric motor, what you're going to see, and what you do see already in models like Tesla, is the most of the hardware is batteries that are distributed along the bottom of the car. So that changes so much about the driving dynamics, because the center of gravity is different on the car, but also it opens up the space of the car in a totally interesting way. So you can have people, and especially if you marry it with autonomous vehicle, you can have people sitting backwards, forwards, this way, that way, lounging, plenty of space to accommodate different size wheelchairs and mobility aids, service dogs, carers, PAs, your whole family, you name it. So the space of what a car becomes is different, because we're no longer wedded to this engine in the front, 2 seats in the front, 3 seats in the back, whatever, we're all sitting in the same direction. So it's interesting and fun ultimately to think about the way that inclusive design, right, by considering lead users right away from the start in this exciting process of redesigning the car. How that can lead to interesting and innovative approaches to cars in general.
It's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, thank you for your time and insights today.
Thanks, Martyn. It's been my absolute pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
Hi guys, so my next interview is with Chris McGinley at the Helen Hamlin, is it Foundation, Chris?
Helen Hamlin Centre for Design.
And great, and then in terms of that's who you work for, obviously we were talking just before about the funding comes from Helen Hamlin's trust as well, is that right?
Yeah, we get, each year we get a kind of endowment, I guess. It's something to keep core staff going, but we generate most of the money in the centre through projects and engagements with businesses, charities, government, and so on.
Yeah, so sort of builds upon that first funding at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that's the thing that keeps us ticking over, but everything else is generated through our research, our projects, our work. We do some executive education, which is what I've kind of just ducked out of earlier on. So, yeah. Sure.
Well, as you know, we're on this journey on these 2 podcasts looking at the access and inclusion to physical spaces and products. So obviously, that your role in the School of Design that you're working at, I can imagine there's a million different ways we could explore this. But I mean, I think what stands out the most and the most importance for me is all the idea of the research-led design that you facilitate. So could you just explain a bit more, I suppose, what the importance of research-led, but also how the School of Design facilitate that as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Royal College of Art is it's fully postgrad, so everyone that comes here has a previous degree, and the Helen Hamlin Centre, it's all staff. There's no students here as such, apart from occasionally when we get students in for projects. But what we do tend to do is employ recent graduates, a lot of them from the RCA, and in some ways, you could say brainwash, or we try and get these young designers just almost the kind of start of where they're really going to make an impact in the design world, and teach them methods, techniques, philosophies around inclusive design. And what we'll do is we'll partner. I mean, we do sort of inclusive research and inclusive design in lots of ways, but as far as the School of Design goes, we'll often employ a young designer, partner them with an industry partner around a particular topic, and then we'll direct them through the process. So they're using their design skills. There's some really amazing designers that come from the RCA. It ranks #1 in the world, year on. But I think what a lot of the time is just a kind of fledgling skill is that research or that people-centeredness. So we try and get in there early, get these kind of young, creative, enthusiastic designers for maybe a year project, sometimes a 2-year project, and really talk to them and really engage them with this idea of inclusion. So when they go elsewhere, we don't hold on to them forever. They go all over the globe. But we like to try and plant that little seeds of inclusive design and research-driven outputs. But I guess unlike a lot of research, we would be, we'd be frustrated, and we would see it as a bit of a failing if it wasn't actioned. So we're very much about, the designs are research-driven, but it's not about the research for research's sake. It has to be applicable.
Yeah. And so thinking you said about the philosophy, if you like, of inclusive design, could you just share a few thoughts on what inclusive design is to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of tricky question, but I guess I see inclusive design as a route to improve lives, but also as a kind of a stance around including more diverse people, asking who's missing. When a voice is missing from a design problem, being aware of that, being conscious of it, and purposely looking for the people that are missing to try and bring them in. And that's, in some ways, that's making the design task more challenging. But I think it should be, it should be challenging, and I think that gives you the scope to do something interesting as well.
So if you've got that awareness, as you say, of those that are maybe not being considered in the design process, and you identify, like you say, you mentioned a couple of people that were in the workshops today. So I was going to say how you might go through the research. So obviously one is to bring that sort of representatives of that group of people together with the designers just to chat through. Are there any other sort of methods that you would use to try to bridge that gap, really?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a large part of what the design is in our projects. It's designing the research. It's designing the platforms for people to express themselves. It's designing, I guess, possibilities for people to talk openly, giving people tools to talk to the designers as well as for designers to talk to other people. Because I think sometimes this idea that a designer goes in to wherever and they're the expert and they put on the kind of the expert hat. I think sometimes that dynamic's a bit weird. So a lot of what we do will be about creating a level playing field for everybody, and everyone's opinion is equally valid. There's no kind of expertise or hierarchy that trumps anything else. You know, it's about opening up discussions and trying to really, I guess, frame problems the right way or ask the right questions. You know, challenge briefs, challenge the kind of status quo or how things have been done, because that's the way they've always been done. It's okay, well why, you know? Yeah. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah. And my next question, I was thinking about, you know, transportation is so vital for all people, and it's known for being quite tricky for disabled people. Are there any examples you've had of working with transport providers to improve accessibility there?
Yeah, no, I mean, that issue was huge, and we've worked on a few mobility transport related projects. Currently, we're working with TfL, and with them we're creating a kind of, I don't know how you would maybe frame it. It's almost like a manifesto, you know. It's talking to inclusion and more kind of social models of inclusion. But it's funny. It's trying to be accessible to TfL's designers, TfL's engineers. So we're trying to demystify what inclusion is for them almost, and then point out where within TfL this is already happening, and they're maybe not realizing, but going a little bit, well, definitely going well beyond tick box type stuff, you know. So they have some agendas around, you know, stair-free access, and I think that's brilliant, and you know, it's much needed. But I think they're very wary, and we're very wary of creating anything that becomes tick boxy, you know, like you must do this, and you almost, when you get those kind of documents, it almost encourages you to, you know, aim for the minimum, because you know what the minimum is, so you always aim for that minimum.
Yeah.
So we're having to frame it in an open enough way that people see it as an opportunity to innovate, and they see that inclusion isn't as difficult as they maybe think, and give some pathways to tools and methods, but also to groups of people that wouldn't maybe be the typical people they would consult or they would bring in on the teams. And a lot of that stuff's already established at TfL, but it's just about having it in like a readable document that you can quite quickly get into and get something from, and it might point you somewhere else, but it's all very clear. So we're doing that. We also worked in a London taxi, a new London taxi, for that project must have lasted about 3 years. And we started to, just look at the start point was inclusion. You know, we were using language like hyper inclusive, you know, because the black cab's not too bad as it stands, the traditional black cab. But there's issues around the ramps. There's issues around people being, you know, belted in. Like it's quite an intrusive process at the moment. You know, it's a taxi driver gets out and he goes into his boot and he'll unwrap these, you know, these kind of harnesses out of the plastic. You know, they're sparkling new. You know, because I think anyone that's using particularly a wheelchair or a scooter, they'll tend to just go in and not get belted in, you know. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. You know, it takes a while. It's your personal body space. I think often the taxi drivers find it quite a kind of complex and uncomfortable thing, and the passenger finds it to be an uncomfortable thing. So most of the time people just go in sideways, and that's pretty dangerous, but that's the easiest way to do it. So we were looking at ways that you could allow more space and easier fastening in, seat belting in. Also the idea that you're traveling in a car and you're looking sideways, you want to be looking forward. And so there's been a few different projects, and a lot of that I think is real practical, building, testing, iterating, but in an inclusive way. The ideas are generated with people with different mobility challenges. And then we created a kind of prototype. We call it a buck, so a full size wooden version of a taxi. But we could modify it really quickly. So we had the information, the sort of data and ergonomics and the usual stuff that, every design or engineer student should come across at some point, or be given a book, about human scale or, anthropometrics, body measurement. So all that stuff, that's cool. And, we had that fairly well understood. But what we really wanted to get was this sort of element of empathy, of the experience, of the well-being of the passenger. So not entirely, scientific about it, because you sort of lose something. Maybe you get it 100% right for measurement and what have you, but what about those little interactions? Maybe chatting to the taxi driver, is your experience lessened because you can't make eye contact with the taxi driver, so trying to work out what those little things were, what people liked about what might be considered a kind of luxurious way to get around, so if that's what you're after, it's not just about access, it's about the pleasure of that experience as well. So we're trying to unpick that.
That's a really powerful way of, as we said a few times, having that input from users or stakeholders, but then being able to amend it and change it pretty quickly. It's a really good idea.
I think it's happening. So my background is physical products. I think in digital spaces, that idea of being agile and quickly changing things is
lean startup.
I think all that language and that kind of process of working is really kind of well embedded there and well understood. It's maybe it's the physical equivalent of that, to create designs, environments that can be modified quickly, can be tested quickly, you can get feedback quickly, you can show alternatives before you get into the actual creation of, in this instance, a working full-size vehicle, and do your final testing and final finessing.
Brilliant. That's been really, really helpful to get those insights from you there, Chris. So best of luck for the future projects and the current projects, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Magic. Thanks, Martyn.